I have been 43 years in the service of His Holy Inquisition, and I tell you now, with the last breath rattling in my chest and the smell of my own burning flesh filling these dank stone chambers, that faith is the cruelest joke the Imperium ever played upon its children. Not because the Emperor is false, no, that would be heresy beyond measure, and I am still his faithful servant even as they prepare the final brand for my forehead. Faith is cruel because it teaches us to expect answers to our prayers, when the truth is far more terrible. He hears every word we whisper in the darkness, every desperate plea we send spiraling up through the incense smoke, and he simply chooses silence. My name was Cornelius Vex, interrogator of the 3rd grade, servant of Inquisitor Malthius of the Ordo Hereticus. I say was, because names, like everything else in this galaxy, are privileges that can be revoked. The brass nameplate has been scraped from my door, my ident cards burned in the ceremonial brazier, my access codes purged from the cogitator banks. I am become a number now, a series of digits stamped into my flesh with heated iron. Penitent 7749 Omega Tertius. The numerals still weep blood where they carved them into my chest, though the pain has become a distant thing, like the memory of sunlight on a world I will never see again. They tell me I have 3 days remaining before the final judgment, 3 days to compose my thoughts and prepare my soul for whatever awaits beyond the black curtain. The servitor that brings my daily ration of corpse starch and recycled water croaks out the countdown with its mechanical larynx. 2 days, 17 hours, 43 minutes, until spiritual assessment commences. Its voice is like grinding gears, a sound that has haunted my dreams for decades. How fitting that it should herald my doom with that same metallic rasp. I suppose I should begin at the beginning, though in the Imperium there are no true beginnings, only the endless grinding continuation of duty and service. I was born in Hive Septimus, on an industrial world whose name I was never permitted to know security protocols. They said, as if a child could somehow compromise the location of his birth through careless words. My parents were mid-level manufactorum supervisors, blessed with the privilege of a hab unit that contained 2 whole rooms and a functioning air recycler. We were wealthy by the standards of the Underhive, prosperous enough to afford real protein once every 10 days and synthetic textiles that weren't actively toxic to human skin. The call came when I was 16 standard years old. I remember the day with perfect clarity, every detail burned into my memory like a brand. The way the morning shift klaxon echoed off the hab block walls, the taste of recycled air thick with chemical undertones, the feel of the rough synth wool blanket beneath my fingers as I prepared for another day in the sorting halls. Then came the knock at our door, not the perfunctory rap of a neighbor or the electronic chime of the daily nutrition delivery, but 3 measured strikes that seemed to shake the walls themselves. My father answered, his face already pale with the knowledge that such knocks never brought good news. Behind the door stood a figure wrapped in the black robes of the Ecclesiarchy, a man whose face was a map of old scars and whose eyes held the cold fire of absolute certainty. He carried with him the smell of incense and old parchment, of sacred oils, and something else, something that made my nostrils burn and my eyes water. Later, I would recognize that odor as the lingering trace of promethium, the fuel they use in the flamers that cleanse heretics from the galaxy. He had come directly from a purging. "The boy," he said without preamble, his voice like gravel tumbling down a deep well. "Cornelius Vex. The God Emperor has need of him." There was no discussion, no negotiation. Within the hour, I had been processed through the intake stations, my few possessions catalogued and assigned to new owners, my family given the standard compensation of 3 months' wages and a certificate of service suitable for framing. They wept as the transport carried me away, but I felt only excitement. I had been chosen. Out of all the billions of souls in that hive, the Emperor's servants had selected me for some greater purpose. How young I was. How perfectly, criminally naive. The scolum where they took me squatted like a metal tumor on the northern face of the hive, its walls black with centuries of industrial soot, and its windows covered with iron bars that cast cage-like shadows across the floors. Here, along with 200 other selected children, I learned the first lesson of Imperial service, that we were no longer individuals but instruments, tools to be shaped and sharpened according to the needs of those who wielded us. The days began before dawn with the recitation of the sacred catechisms, our young voices rising in unison as we proclaimed our devotion to the Golden Throne. "The Emperor protects," we chanted, our breath forming clouds in the frigid air of the chapel. "His will be done. His enemies shall know only death." The words felt powerful on my tongue, like incantations that might call down divine fire upon the enemies of mankind. We believed every syllable. After morning prayers came physical conditioning, endless hours of running through corridors lined with portraits of Imperial saints, their painted eyes following our progress with expressions of stern approval. We learned to fight with shock mauls and las pistols, to move silently through darkened rooms, to resist pain and fear and doubt. The instructors were former members of the various Imperial organizations, retired guardsmen with missing limbs and burn scars, ex-Arbites whose augmetic eyes clicked and whirred as they tracked our movements, defrocked priests whose voices had been reduced to whispers by throat injuries sustained in service to the Emperor. But it was in the theological classes where I truly excelled. While my peers struggled with the complex dogma and seemingly contradictory tenets of Imperial faith, I found myself drawn deeper and deeper into the labyrinthine theology of the Ecclesiarchy. The instructor, a wizened woman whose left arm had been replaced by a crude mechanical appendage, recognized my aptitude and began assigning me additional texts, commentaries on the nature of the Emperor's divinity, treatises on the identification of heretical thought patterns, manuals for the proper conduct of interrogations. "Faith," she told me one afternoon as the other students filed out for evening meal, "is not merely belief, young Vex. Faith is a weapon, as surely as any bolt gun or chainsword. But like all weapons, it must be properly maintained, regularly exercised, kept sharp, and ready for use." Her mechanical fingers drummed against the lectern as she spoke, producing a rhythmic clicking that seemed to punctuate her words. The faithful do not simply believe in the Emperor's divinity, they wield that belief against his enemies. They turn their certainty into a blade that cuts through doubt and hesitation. I nodded eagerly, already imagining myself as one of those blade-wielding faithful, a warrior of the spirit ready to die for the Golden Throne. The woman smiled, her lips pulling back to reveal teeth that had been replaced with small silver implants, each one inscribed with microscopic prayers. "You have potential, Cornelius," she said, and the sound of my name in her ruined voice was like a benediction. "Great potential. The Inquisition has need of young men with your particular gifts." The Inquisition. Even the word sent shivers down my spine, conjuring images of black-armored figures striding through smoky battlefields, their weapons crackling with righteous energy as they struck down heretics and mutants and worse things that lurked in the darkness between stars. To serve the Inquisition was to serve at the very right hand of the Emperor, to be entrusted with the sacred duty of protecting humanity from threats that lesser mortals could not even comprehend. I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor, memorizing every canonical text, every prescribed ritual, every approved prayer and hymn. I learned to recognize the subtle signs of heretical corruption, to identify the telltale patterns of cultist behavior, to spot the microscopic mutations that marked the touch of chaos. My instructors praised my dedication, my thoroughness, my unwavering faith in the righteousness of our cause. When graduation came, I stood with 19 other selected students in the great hall of the Scolum, our black carapace uniforms crisp and new, our faces shining with zealous pride. The Inquisitor who presided over the ceremony was a towering figure in power armor, his face hidden behind a skull-faced helmet that turned his voice into an electronic rasp. He spoke of duty and sacrifice, of the long war against the forces that sought to destroy humanity, of the honor that awaited those who served without question or doubt. "You are no longer children," he declared, his amplified voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You are instruments of the Emperor's will, forged in the fires of faith and tempered by years of training. Some of you will die in service to the Golden Throne. Some of you will live to see your hair turn white and your bodies bend with age. All of you will know the satisfaction that comes from duty faithfully performed." He assigned us to our various postings with mechanical precision, calling out names and destinations like a quartermaster distributing supplies. Some went to fortress worlds on the eastern fringe, others to the great shrine cities of the inner sectors. When my name was called, I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. "Cornelius Vex," the Inquisitor intoned, "you are assigned to the retinue of Inquisitor Malthius of the Ordo Hereticus, currently operating in the Segmentum Solar. You will serve as interrogator of the 3rd grade, with full authority to question suspects and conduct preliminary investigations under the direct supervision of your superior. Report to Docking Bay 7 at 0600 tomorrow for transport to the Inquisition vessel Pious Doubt." That night, alone in my narrow cell, I knelt before the small shrine that had been my companion throughout my years at the Skolum. A simple brass aquila mounted on the wall, its wings spread in eternal vigilance. I pressed my forehead to the cold metal and whispered the prayers that had sustained me through every trial, every moment of doubt, every long hour of study and preparation. "Emperor of mankind," I breathed, my words barely audible even to myself, "I offer myself to your service. Make me worthy of the trust you have placed in me. Grant me the strength to face whatever horrors await in the darkness. Let me be your faithful sword against the enemies of humanity." The aquila stared back at me with its empty eye sockets, brass wings catching the dim light from the corridor outside. I thought I felt something then, a warmth, a presence, a sense that my prayers were being heard by some vast and benevolent intelligence that watched over us all. It was the last time I would feel such comfort. The last time I would believe that faith was anything more than a beautiful lie we tell ourselves to make the darkness bearable. The Pious Doubt was waiting for me at the appointed docking bay, its hull black as the void between stars and bristling with weapon batteries that could reduce a small moon to ash and vapor. As I approached the boarding ramp, my few possessions clutched in a regulation duffel bag, I caught my first glimpse of Inquisitor Malthius himself. He was not what I had expected. He was not what I had expected. Where I had imagined a towering figure wreathed in righteous fury, I found instead a man of unremarkable height, wearing simple robes beneath practical armor. His face was weathered but kind, marked by laugh lines more than scars, and when he smiled, actually smiled at my approach, I felt the first crack in the wall of cynicism I had built around my heart. "Sister Cordelia," he said, extending a hand that bore no rings of office, no ostentatious displays of rank. "I've read your service record, impressive work on Crucible 7. I accepted the handshake, noting the calluses that spoke of real labor, not just ceremonial gesture. "Thank you, Inquisitor. Though I should mention my faith isn't what it once was." Most Inquisitors would have recoiled at such honesty, demanded immediate purification rituals or worse. Malthius merely nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Doubt is the beginning of wisdom, and I have need of wisdom more than blind devotion." As we walked up the boarding ramp together, he continued speaking in a voice that carried no trace of the thunderous oratory I associated with his rank. "Tell me, sister, what do you make of a God who allows children to burn while their parents pray for salvation?" The question hit me like a physical blow. It was the very question that had torn my faith to shreds on Crucible 7, the one that haunted my dreams and turned my prayers to ash in my mouth. I expected it to be a test, a trap designed to expose my heretical thoughts. Instead, when I looked at his face, I saw genuine curiosity and something that might have been pain. "I think," I said carefully, "that either our God is not as benevolent as we claim, or he is not as powerful as we believe. Or perhaps—" I hesitated, then pressed on. "Perhaps he simply doesn't exist at all." Rather than ordering my immediate execution for blasphemy, Malthius smiled sadly. "Those are the only logical conclusions, aren't they? And yet here we are, servants of an Imperium, built on faith in that very same God. The ship's interior was as austere as its owner appeared to be. No golden aquilers adorned the bulkheads, no incense braziers filled the air with sanctified smoke. Instead, the corridors were lined with bookshelves. Actual books, not data slates, their spines bearing titles I didn't recognize. Philosophy texts, scientific treatises, even what appeared to be collections of poetry. "You read," I observed. "Voraciously," he confirmed. "The Emperor gave us mines, Sister Cordelia. I find it insulting to him, if he exists, to leave them unused." My quarters were Spartan but comfortable, with a small viewport that offered a view of the stars and, more importantly, my own small shelf for books. It was a luxury I hadn't expected aboard an inquisitorial vessel. That first night, as the pious doubt translated into the warp and began its journey toward our unknown destination, Maltheus invited me to dine with him in his private chambers. The meal was simple processed protein and recycled water, but the conversation that accompanied it was anything but. "What do you know of the miracle of Saint Euphemia?" he asked, cutting his food with methodical precision. I searched my memory for the relevant hagiography. She was a minor saint from the segmentum solar. During a plague outbreak on her world, she supposedly healed thousands through prayer alone. The plague vanished overnight, and the planetary governor declared her divinity proven. Maltheus nodded. "And what do the medical records from that period show?" I frowned. Medical records? I wasn't aware any survived from that era. Oh, they do. Carefully preserved in the archives of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Would you be surprised to learn that the plague in question was a viral hemorrhagic fever that typically runs its course in 7 to 10 days? That Saint Euphemia's miraculous healings occurred precisely at the point when natural recovery would be expected. The implications hit me immediately. You're suggesting the miracle was simply timing? I'm suggesting that faith and medicine are not mutually exclusive, but that we should be honest about which is doing the heavy lifting. He set down his utensil and fixed me with a steady gaze. "The people recovered, sister. Their suffering ended. Does it matter whether their salvation came from divine intervention or natural immune response? To them? Probably not. But to us? To the Imperium that holds up such stories as proof of the Emperor's divinity?" I shook my head. "It changes everything." "Does it?" His question was gentle but probing. If a mother tells her child that the Emperor watches over him to help him sleep through the night, is that lie cruel when it grants him peace? If a soldier charges into battle believing the Emperor guides his aim, is that delusion harmful when it gives him the courage to protect his comrades? I stared at my reflection in the darkened viewport, seeing the face of a woman who no longer knew what she believed. But if it's all lies, beautiful lies, as I said before, then what are we? What is the Imperium built on? "Perhaps," Maltheus said quietly, "that's the wrong question. Perhaps we should ask what the Imperium could be built on instead." Over the following days, as we traveled through the nightmare realm of the warp, our conversations continued. Maltheus shared with me cases from his long career, instances where blind faith had led to atrocity, where dogma had prevented solutions that simple reason could have provided. But he also showed me moments where belief, even unfounded belief, had created genuine good in the world. There was the hive world, where a charismatic preacher had convinced the downtrodden masses that the Emperor wanted them to care for their sick and elderly, leading to the establishment of the first medical clinics the Underhive had seen in centuries. The doctrine was dubious, the theological justification non-existent, but the sick were healed nonetheless. There was the regiment that had held a vital pass against impossible odds, sustained not by tactical superiority or superior equipment, but by their absolute certainty that the Emperor would not let them fail. They had died to the last man, but their sacrifice had saved 3 billion civilians on the world below. "Faith," Maltheus explained as we stood together in his private library, "is a tool. Like any tool, it can be used to build or to destroy. The question is not whether the tool is inherently good or evil, but whether we use it wisely." "But wisdom requires truth," I protested. How can we use faith wisely if we base it on lies? He pulled a book from his shelf, a collection of pre-imperial philosophy that should have been burned as heretical millennia ago. Consider this, he said, opening to a marked passage. Ancient Terra had hundreds of religions, most of them mutually contradictory. They couldn't all be literally true, could they? And yet many produced remarkable acts of compassion, sacrifice, and human achievement. Were all their adherents fools? I read the passage he indicated, a meditation on the nature of meaning and purpose in an seemingly meaningless universe. The words resonated with something deep in my chest, a hunger I had felt, but never been able to name. No, I said finally. Not fools. But then, what were they? Human beings trying to make sense of existence. Trying to find purpose in chaos, meaning in suffering, hope in despair. The specific stories they told themselves may have been factually incorrect, but the human needs those stories addressed were absolutely real. That night, I dreamed of Crucible 7 again. But this time, instead of focusing on my failure to save the burning children, I found myself remembering the woman who had held them as they died. She had whispered prayers to the Emperor even as the flames consumed her flesh, not because she believed those prayers would save her, but because they gave her the strength to comfort the children in their final moments. The prayers had not stopped the fire, but they had transformed her from a victim into someone who could offer love in the face of ultimate horror. When I woke, I found Malthius waiting in the ship's small chapel, a simple room with a single candle burning before an unadorned altar. He was not praying, but simply sitting in contemplation. I used to think, I said, joining him on the hard wooden bench, that faith was either true or false, helpful or harmful, divine or delusion. And now I wonder if those are the wrong categories entirely. I watched the candle flame dance in the recycled air. The woman on Crucible 7, her faith didn't save those children, but it saved her from becoming something less than human in that moment. It let her die as herself rather than as a broken animal. Malthius nodded slowly. I've been an inquisitor for 40 years, sister. I've seen faith used to justify the most monstrous acts imaginable. I've also seen it inspire acts of such profound goodness that they brought tears to my eyes. The faith itself was the same in both cases. What differed was the wisdom or lack thereof of those who wielded it. So where does that leave us? Where does it leave the Imperium? I think, he said, rising and moving toward the altar, it leaves us with a choice. We can continue to pretend that faith is about having the right answers, about knowing with absolute certainty what God wants. Or we can accept that faith is about having the courage to act with love and wisdom, even when we don't know, even when we can't be sure. He picked up the candle, holding it carefully in his weathered hands. This flame isn't the Emperor, Sister Cordelia. It's just a chemical reaction between wax and oxygen. But when I look at it, I remember every person I've tried to help, every life I've tried to save, every small act of mercy I've attempted in his name. The flame doesn't make those memories sacred. The memories make the flame sacred. I understood then what he was offering me, not a restoration of my old faith, but the possibility of something new. A faith built not on certainty but on commitment, not on knowledge but on love, not on answers but on better questions. What is our mission? I asked. Our real mission? Malthius smiled, and for the first time since Crucible 7, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. We're going to a world where the local cardinal has been performing miracles, he said, healing the sick, raising the dead, proving the Emperor's divine power to all who witness his works. And people are dying. The miracles are real, sister, but they're not divine. They're something else entirely, something that threatens not just that world, but potentially the entire sector. I stood, feeling strength return to limbs that had been weak with despair for too long. What do you need me to do? Help me save them, he said simply. All of them. The faithful and the faithless, the true believers and the doubters. Help me find a way to preserve what's good about their faith while stopping what's killing them. As we prepared to translate back to real space, I realized that my faith hadn't been restored, it had been reborn. Not as blind belief in ancient dogma, but as a commitment to use whatever tools I possessed, including faith itself, in service of something larger than my own certainty. The Emperor might not answer prayers, but perhaps, if we were wise enough and brave enough, we could answer them for him. The translation back to real space felt different this time. Instead of the usual violent wrench between dimensions, there was an almost gentle dissolution, like waking from a dream that had been more real than reality itself. The Time's penitence vigil times materialized around us gradually, its familiar corridors and chambers taking shape as the warp's influence faded. But we were not the same ship that had entered the Sea of Souls weeks ago. The changes were subtle at first. The incense burners still cast their sacred smoke, but now it carried the faint scent of alien spores alongside the traditional frankincense. The hymns continued to echo through the vox speakers, but harmonized with frequencies that had never emerged from human throats. Most disturbing of all, the prayers continued, but they were being answered, not by the Emperor. As far as I could tell, the responses came from somewhere else entirely, carrying a warmth that Imperial doctrine would have branded as heretical if anyone had been brave enough to voice their suspicions. I found Captain Voldris in his quarters, staring at a report from the ship's Medicae staff. His scarred face was unreadable, but I could sense the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. "Chaplain," he said without looking up, "tell me about miracles." I settled into the chair across from his desk, noting how the light from his reading lamp seemed to bend at strange angles, as if the very air had been subtly altered by our journey. "What sort of miracles, Captain?" "The kind where my crew stops dying from the red consumption." He set down the report and fixed me with those pale eyes that had seen too much. "According to Medicae Tertius Kellen, the infection rates have dropped by 70% in the past week. Not just new cases, existing infections are going into remission. She can't explain it." I had been expecting this conversation, though I'd hoped to have more time to prepare my response. "The Emperor protects, Captain. Perhaps our trials in the warp have purified." "Don't." His voice carried the quiet authority that had kept this ship together through a dozen different hells. "I've served alongside priests for 30 years, Matthias. I know the difference between divine intervention and something else wearing its mask." The use of my given name was significant. In private moments like these, Valdris had always been more than just a commanding officer. He was the closest thing to a friend I'd had since taking my vows. If I couldn't be honest with him, then my rebirth of faith was worthless. "You're right," I said. "This isn't the Emperor's work." He leaned back in his chair, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Then what is it?" I told him about the crystalline entities, about their offer of symbiosis rather than conquest. I described how they seemed to understand faith, not as rigid adherence to doctrine, but as a living thing that could grow and adapt. Most dangerous of all, I explained how they appeared to genuinely care about human suffering in a way that transcended mere survival advantage. "They're not trying to replace our faith," I concluded. "They're trying to help us understand what it could become if we weren't so terrified of change." Valdris was quiet for a long time, his fingers drumming against the desk in a pattern that matched the ship's heartbeat. Finally, he spoke. "I've been having dreams. Dreams. Of home. Of Cressida Prime before the Orc invasion, but not as I remember it as it could have been. Green spaces where there were only ash fields. Cities that grew instead of merely expanding. People who looked at the stars with wonder instead of fear." He paused. "In these dreams, there are still shrines to the Emperor, still prayers and ceremonies, but they feel alive, joyful, instead of desperate." I understood then that the crystalline entities hadn't limited their contact to me. They were reaching out through dreams, through subtle influences, through the very air we breathed. The question was whether this constituted corruption or evolution. "What are you going to do?" I asked. What any Imperial captain would do when faced with potential Xenos corruption aboard his ship, he said. Then he smiled, an expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. "I'm going to trust my chaplain's judgment." If you tell me this is the Emperor's will working through unexpected agents, I'll believe you. If you tell me we're all damned, I'll order the ship scuttled before we can spread the infection. The weight of that trust was almost crushing. In that moment, I held the fate of 3,000 souls in my hands more, if we considered the potential consequences of our choice, spreading beyond the time's penitence vigil asterisk. Every word of my theological training screamed that I should order purification protocols activated immediately. But those same 3,000 souls were healthier, happier, and more hopeful than they'd been in decades. The suicide rates that had plagued us since Val Thorn had dropped to zero, disciplinary infractions were at an all-time low. Most telling of all, chapel attendance had actually increased, even as the prayers themselves began to incorporate elements that would have horrified any Orthodox inquisitor. "I need to visit the lower decks," I said. The journey down through the ship's depths revealed the full extent of the changes. In the worker habitation zones, families that had been torn apart by despair were sharing meals and stories again. Children who had never smiled were playing games that incorporated alien geometries in ways that somehow felt natural. The elderly, instead of waiting to die, were teaching the young songs that blended high Gothic with harmonic progressions that had never existed in human music. But it was in the ship's bowels, near the plasma drives, that I found the most significant change. A group of tech adepts had gathered around what appeared to be a shrine, but unlike any I'd seen before. The traditional Imperial iconography was there: the double-headed eagle, the skull and cogwheel of the Mechanicus, passages from the Lectitio Divinitatis inscribed in gold. But these familiar elements were interwoven with crystalline structures that pulsed with their own light, creating patterns that seemed to extend into dimensions I couldn't perceive. The lead adept, Magos Quintus Veron, noticed my approach and turned to face me. The mechanical half of his face displayed data streams I couldn't read, but his remaining human eye held an expression of profound peace. "Chaplain," he said, his vox grill filtering his words into something that was almost musical. "I was hoping you would come." "Magos, what is this place?" "A synthesis," he replied. "For 2 centuries I have served the Omnissiah, seeking to understand the divine through the perfection of the machine, but I always felt incomplete, as though I was grasping only fragments of a greater truth." He gestured to the hybrid shrine with one of his servo arms. "These entities, these crystalline beings, they do not seek to replace our faith. They offer to complete it. They show us that the machine spirit and the God Emperor's light are not separate things, but different aspects of a single divine principle that permeates all existence." I studied the shrine more closely. The alien crystal formations weren't random. They followed mathematical principles that echoed the sacred geometries found in the most ancient imperial temples. But they also incorporated elements that seemed to respond to the emotions and intentions of those who approached them, creating a living interface between the mechanical and spiritual realms. "Have you been able to communicate with them directly?" I asked. "Not in words," Veron replied, "but in pure information transfer. They have shown me schematics for technologies that could revolutionize our understanding of both warfare and healing. Weapons that could neutralize enemy forces without causing permanent harm. Medical devices that could repair genetic damage at the cellular level. Transportation systems that would make warp travel unnecessary." The implications were staggering. If these entities truly possessed such knowledge and were willing to share it freely, they could transform human civilization within a generation. But the cost might be nothing less than the soul of humanity itself. "Why us?" I asked, as much to myself as to the Magos. "Why did they choose our ship?" "Perhaps," came a new voice from behind me, "because you were already broken." I turned to find Sister Hospitaller Miriam approaching, her medical robes rustling against the metal deck plates. But there was something different about her, a lightness to her step that hadn't been there before our warp journey, and her eyes held depths that spoke of revelations I couldn't imagine. "Sister, I've been treating crew members affected by their influence for weeks now," she said, "studying blood samples, monitoring brain activity, trying to understand what's happening to us at the biological level. What I found. She paused, struggling with words. It's not infection, Chaplain. It's healing. She activated a data pad and showed me cellular imagery that defied easy interpretation. Look at these tissue samples. The crystalline entities aren't parasitic, they're symbiotic in the truest sense. They integrate with human biology at the genetic level, but they don't replace or dominate. They repair. They enhance. They remove accumulated genetic damage from centuries of radiation exposure, chemical poisoning, and spiritual despair. The images showed DNA helixes that had been restored to configurations more perfect than anything in the baseline human genome, neurological pathways that had been optimized for both rational thought and emotional processing, immune systems that had been enhanced to fight not just biological threats, but the subtle corruptions that plagued human souls in the dark millennium. They're making us more than we were, she continued, not post-human in the way the Adeptus Mechanicus seeks, but truly human in a way we haven't been for millennia, able to feel joy without guilt, hope without naivety, faith without fear. I thought about the children I'd seen playing their impossible games, the families reuniting over shared meals, the workers who sang while they toiled in the ship's depths. Were these the actions of people being corrupted, or were they what humans looked like when they were finally free from the crushing weight of imperial orthodoxy? There's something else, Sister Miriam said. I've been monitoring the psychic resonance patterns throughout the ship. The crystalline entities aren't just healing us physically, they're creating a kind of collective consciousness. Not a hive mind, she added quickly, seeing my expression. Individual personality and free will remain intact. But there's a shared awareness now, a sense of connection that extends beyond normal human empathy. Connection to what? To each other, to the ship itself, and to something vast and ancient that spans the galaxy. She hesitated. Chaplain, I think we may be witnessing the birth of a new form of human consciousness, one that could unite our species in ways the Imperium has never achieved through conquest and control. The words hung in the air like an accusation. What she was describing was either the most profound spiritual evolution in human history or the most sophisticated form of Xenos corruption ever encountered. The fact that I could no longer tell the difference with certainty was perhaps the most disturbing revelation of all. I made my way back to my quarters through corridors that seemed subtly different with each passing hour. The Gothic architecture remained unchanged, but the shadows cast by the lumens formed patterns that spoke to parts of my mind I'd never known existed. Crew members I passed nodded with genuine warmth rather than the dutiful respect I'd grown accustomed to. Some of the children had begun following me, not out of fear or obligation, but with the simple affection they might show an uncle or grandfather. In the solitude of my chambers, I knelt before my private shrine and attempted to pray, but the familiar words of the Imperial Creed felt hollow in my mouth, like a language I'd once spoken fluently but could no longer remember. Instead, I found myself reaching towards something that had no name in High Gothic, a sense of presence that was vast beyond comprehension yet intimately personal, ancient beyond measurement yet urgently concerned with the present moment. Was this the Emperor? Was this what he had always been, but filtered through layers of dogma and political necessity until his true nature was obscured? Or was I experiencing the first stages of spiritual corruption, feeling the alien consciousness that was systematically dismantling everything I'd once held sacred? The answer came not as words, but as understanding, flowing through my awareness like warm light through a crystal prism. The entities weren't trying to replace human faith, they were trying to remind us what faith had been before it became weaponized by institutional power. They showed me glimpses of the Emperor as he had been during the Great Crusade. Not a distant, wrathful god, demanding sacrifice and submission, but a being of immense compassion who had sacrificed his own humanity in order to preserve something precious in his species. The visions that followed were both beautiful and terrible. I saw human worlds where crystalline symbiosis had taken root, where suffering still existed, but was met with collective response rather than individual despair. I witnessed space marines who retained all their martial prowess, but had learned to value creation alongside destruction. I observed inquisitors whose pursuit of truth was tempered by wisdom rather than paranoia. But I also saw the resistance such changes would provoke. Imperial authorities who would brand any deviation from orthodoxy as heresy. Military forces that would destroy entire star systems rather than allow corruption to spread. The very institutions I had served faithfully for decades would inevitably view our transformation as an existential threat to everything they represented. When I finally rose from my prayers, I knew what I had to do. Captain Valdris was waiting for me in the corridor outside my quarters, as if he had somehow sensed the resolution of my spiritual crisis. "Well?" he asked simply. "We continue as we are," I said, "but carefully. The crystalline entities represent either humanity's greatest hope or its ultimate doom, and I'm no longer certain the distinction matters. What I am certain of is that 3,000 souls under our care are healthier, happier, and more whole than they've been in living memory. That has to count for something." Valdris nodded slowly. "And when the Inquisition comes, asking questions, we tell them the truth that we encountered Xenos entities in the warp and emerged purified rather than corrupted. We show them our reduced casualty rates, improved morale, and increased operational efficiency. We let them study us, test us, and judge us by their standards." I paused. "And if they decide we're too dangerous to live, we face that fate with the knowledge that we chose compassion over fear." "That's not much of a plan, Chaplain." "No," I agreed, "but it's an act of faith, and perhaps that's enough." In the weeks that followed, the Times Penitence Vigil Times continued its patrol along the eastern fringe, responding to distress calls and protecting Imperial interests with the same dedication we'd always shown. But our methods began to change in subtle ways. Diplomatic solutions were found to conflicts that might once have required orbital bombardment. Damaged ships were repaired with techniques that seemed to emerge spontaneously from our tech adepts' enhanced understanding. Populations that had been written off as lost to Xeno's influence were successfully evacuated and resettled with minimal casualties. Word of our successes spread through official channels, bringing both commendations and scrutiny. The crystalline entities remained largely hidden, their influence manifesting primarily through improved human performance rather than obvious alien technology. But to those who knew what to look for, the signs were unmistakable. The test came 6 months after our return to real space, when Inquisitor Coralia Vex of the Ordo Xenos requested permission to board the Times Penitence Vigil Times for a routine inspection of recent operations. We knew she had access to our mission reports, including detailed accounts of our warp journey and subsequent performance improvements. We also knew that her reputation for thoroughness was matched only by her willingness to order exterminatus against populations she deemed irredeemably corrupted. As her shuttle approached our docking bay, I stood with Captain Valdris and the senior staff, watching through the observation ports. The crystalline entities had grown bolder in recent weeks, their influence spreading throughout the ship in ways that would be impossible to hide from an experienced Inquisitor. Our choice was simple: trust that our transformation represented a genuine spiritual evolution, or activate the ship's self-destruct protocols before she could spread word of our corruption to the wider Imperium. The shuttle touched down with the precision that marked all inquisitorial operations. As the airlock cycled open, I found myself praying not to the Emperor as I had once known him, but to the vast, compassionate presence that now seemed to encompass both human and alien consciousness alike. Inquisitor Vex emerged with her retinue of acolytes and death cult assassins, her power armor gleaming with purity seals and sacred inscriptions. But when her eyes met mine, I saw something unexpected, not suspicion or hostility, but curiosity tinged with what might have been hope. "Chaplain Matthias," she said, her voice carrying the authority of absolute imperial power, "we need to talk." I led Inquisitor Vex through the cathedral's transept toward my private chambers, her entourage following at a respectful distance. The sound of our footsteps echoed differently now. Where once there had been the hollow ring of sanctified stone, now there seemed to be an almost organic resonance, as if the very walls were listening. Your cathedral has changed, she observed, her augmetic eye whirring as it adjusted its focus on the subtle alterations around us. The mechanicus would find these modifications intriguing. I paused before the door to my study, my hand hovering over the activation rune. Everything has changed, Inquisitor. The question is whether we're witnessing heresy or revelation. The Ordo Xenos makes no such distinction when it comes to alien influence, she replied, though her tone carried less conviction than I might have expected. Yet, your Vox transmission spoke of necessity, of survival itself, hanging in the balance. We entered my chambers, and I gestured for her to take the seat across from my desk while her retinue remained outside. Through the tall windows, the city sprawled beneath us, its population of 12 million souls going about their daily routines, unaware that their reality was being rewritten at the quantum level. Tell me about the dreams, I said without preamble. Vex stiffened, her hand instinctively moving toward the bolt pistol at her side. How did you? Because I've had them too. Because half the population of this world has had them. The Tau aren't invading our minds, Inquisitor. They're trying to save us from something far worse. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with both her organic eye and its mechanical twin. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've seen the void ships, in the dreams. Ships that dwarf Imperial vessels like insects compared to leviathans, bearing symbols that make my soul recoil even in sleep. I nodded grimly. The Tyranids were just the beginning. The Tau's long-range sensors have detected what's coming, a force that will consume not just planets or systems, but entire sectors. Their greater good isn't philosophical anymore. It's literal survival. And you believe this justifies what? Abandoning the Emperor's light, embracing Xeno's technology and philosophy. Her words carried the weight of doctrinal certainty, but I could hear the doubt creeping in at the edges. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city I had sworn to protect. The Emperor protects, Inquisitor, but what if the greatest protection he can offer us now is the wisdom to recognize allies where we never expected to find them? That borders dangerously close to heresy, Chaplain. Does it? I turned to face her. Or does clinging to dogma in the face of extinction border on negligence? The Tau call it the fourth sphere expansion, but it's not about conquest anymore. It's about creating a network of mutual protection across multiple species, multiple worlds. They've shared their tactical data with me, Vex. What's coming will make Hive Fleet Leviathan look like a minor inconvenience. She removed her helmet, setting it on the desk between us with a metallic clank. Beneath it, her face was younger than I had expected, though her eyes held the weight of terrible knowledge. Show me, she said simply. I activated the holo projector built into my desk, one of the Tau modifications that had been seamlessly integrated into the chamber. The air above us shimmered, then resolved into a three-dimensional star chart showing our sector and the regions beyond. This is what the Tau call the Silent Zone, I said, highlighting a vast expanse of space that appeared empty on Imperial charts. 3 months ago, it contained 7 inhabited systems with a combined population of nearly 20 billion souls. Today, the projection shifted, showing the same region as it appeared to Tau sensors. Where once there had been stars and planets, now there was only an expanding sphere of absolute darkness, not merely the absence of light, but the absence of everything. Matter, energy, space-time itself seemed to be unraveling at its edges. Emperor preserve us, Vex breathed. What could cause such devastation? The Tau call them the Devourers of Light. We have no Imperial designation because the Imperium has never encountered them and survived to report it. They don't just consume matter and energy, they consume the fundamental forces that hold reality together. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. Everything simply ceases to exist in their wake. The projection zoomed out, showing predicted expansion vectors based on Tau calculations. At their current rate of advance, they'll reach the outer systems of our sector within 2 standard years. The Tau estimate we have 18 months to prepare. Vex leaned back in her chair, her face pale. And their solution is to abandon human space? To flee like cowards? Their solution is to forge an alliance strong enough to stand against the impossible. The bioforms they've been introducing to our ecosystem aren't weapons, Inquisitor, they're evolutionary accelerants, designed to rapidly adapt human physiology for survival in environments where conventional technology fails. I manipulated the projection again, showing the cellular-level changes occurring in the affected population. The enhanced neural pathways allow for instantaneous communication across vast distances without relying on Vox systems that can be disrupted. The biological energy conduits provide power sources that function even when conventional generators fail. Most importantly, the quantum consciousness interface allows for collective problem-solving on a scale that might be sufficient to find a solution to the devourer threat. "You're talking about abandoning humanity itself," she said, but there was less accusation in her voice now and more genuine questioning. "I'm talking about evolving it. The Emperor created the Space Marines to be more than human when the situation demanded it. The Adeptus Mechanicus replaces flesh with steel in pursuit of perfection. How is this different?" Vex stood and began pacing, her power armor servos whirring softly. "Because those transformations serve the Imperium. This serves alien interests. Does it? Or does it serve the interest of continued existence?" I pulled up another section of the projection, showing detailed tactical analyses. "The Tau have run every possible simulation, Inquisitor. Conventional Imperial Navy tactics have a 0% success rate against the Devourers. Space Marine assault doctrines fare no better. Even deploying Titan legions results in complete destruction within hours of contact. And with these modifications, the success probability rises to 12%. Still abysmal, but it's the only scenario in their models where any form of organized resistance remains possible." She stopped pacing and fixed me with an intense stare. "You've been in contact with them directly, haven't you? Not just through dreams or visions?" I nodded slowly. "Water-cased negotiator Porel Mien arrived 3 days ago under a diplomatic flag. She's currently in the lower cathedral, along with a small technical team." "Throne of Terror," Vex muttered, reaching for her weapon again. "They're unarmed and have submitted to full biological monitoring. Inquisitor, they're as terrified of what's coming as we are. The greater good has become something larger than their original philosophy. It's become a desperate attempt to preserve some fragment of civilization against absolute annihilation." Before she could respond, my Vox unit chirped with an urgent priority message. I activated it to find the face of Sergeant Korvax, my most trusted aide. "Chaplain, we have a situation in the lower levels. The guests are requesting immediate audience with you and the Inquisitor. They say it's urgent." "What's the nature of the urgency, Sergeant?" His face was grim. "Sir, they say the advanced scouts have arrived. The Devourers are already here." The blood drained from Inquisitor Vex's face as the implications hit us both. If the projections were accurate, we still had months to prepare. If the enemy was already in system, "Sergeant, initiate Cathedral Defense Protocol 7. All personnel to combat stations. Send word to the PDF command that we may need immediate orbital surveillance data." "Already done, sir." "But Chaplain, the Tau are saying orbital surveillance won't detect them. These aren't ships in any conventional sense." I looked at Vex, seeing my own desperate urgency reflected in her eyes. "Then we go to them. Now." We made our way through the cathedral's lower levels at a rapid pace, her death cult assassins flanking us with weapons drawn but not quite aimed. The Tau delegation had been housed in what were once meditation chambers, spaces now quietly transformed by their presence into something that felt both alien and strangely familiar. Porel Mien rose as we entered, her blue skin marked with the ritual scars that indicated her high rank within the water caste. Behind her stood 2 Earth-cased engineers whose biosuits were integrated with monitoring equipment I couldn't identify, and a single fire-cased warrior whose pulse rifle remained mag-locked to his back in a gesture of non-aggression. Honored Gwela, Mien said, using the Tao term for humans that carried overtones of potential rather than contempt. We bring grave news. The Silence Bringers have manifested in your outer system. Explain, Vex demanded, her authority as an inquisitor cutting through diplomatic niceties. One of the Earth-cased engineers stepped forward, activating a portable holo display. They do not travel through space as we understand it. They exist in the quantum foam beneath reality, emerging only when they encounter sufficient organized matter and energy to feed upon. The display showed what appeared to be empty space, but as the Tau sensors adjusted their frequency, shapes became visible, vast, impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly, seeming to exist in more dimensions than human minds could properly process. Your outermost mining station, designation Tertius 7, ceased all transmissions 6 hours ago, Mien continued. Not destroyed in any conventional sense, but edited from existence. The matter that composed it now feeds their expansion into our reality. How many? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Current sensors detect 3 primary manifestations, with indications of at least 12 more preparing to breach the dimensional barrier. At their demonstrated consumption rate, they will have processed all matter in this system within 47 days. Inquisitor Vex had gone very still, her augmetic implants whirring as they processed combat calculations at superhuman speed. What do you propose? The bioadaptation process can be accelerated, but it requires willing participation from a significant percentage of the population. The quantum consciousness network needs a critical mass to function effectively against entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. And if we refuse? Vex asked. The fire-cast warrior spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Then you will die as individuals, separated and helpless. The choice is evolution or extinction. I felt the weight of 12 million souls pressing down on me. All the people of this world looking to their spiritual leaders for guidance in the face of the impossible. The Emperor's light still burned within me, but perhaps that light now illuminated a path I had never expected to walk. How long do we have to decide? I asked. The process must begin within 12 hours to achieve sufficient integration before the Devourers fully manifest in real space, Mayan replied. After that, the quantum disruption they cause will make the consciousness interface impossible to establish. Inquisitor Vex was studying the tactical displays with the intensity of someone whose entire worldview was being fundamentally challenged. When she finally spoke, her words carried a terrible finality. Show me the process. Show me exactly what you're asking us to become. Mien gestured to the massive crystalline arrays that dominated the chamber's center. The structures pulsed with an inner light that seemed to respond to thought itself, geometric patterns flowing through their translucent depths like frozen lightning. The process begins with neural interface establishment, Mien explained, her voice taking on the tone of someone who had performed this ritual countless times before. Each participant enters a resonance pod, where quantum field generators create a localized space-time distortion. Your consciousness, what you might call your soul, is temporarily separated from purely biological constraints. Vex approached one of the pods, her hand hovering over its smooth surface. Through the transparent material, she could see intricate neural interfaces that looked both beautiful and terrifyingly alien. And this allows us to, what? Speak directly to the Emperor? Not speak to, Mien corrected. Become temporarily integrated with. The Emperor's consciousness exists across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. To reach him, you must expand your awareness beyond the limitations of singular existence. The process allows your individual consciousness to briefly touch the vast network of human psychic potential that connects all Imperial worlds. Captain Thorne had been silent, but now he stepped forward, his weathered face grim. I've seen what happens when men try to touch the divine, sister. Most of them don't come back whole. Some don't come back at all. The risk is real, Mian acknowledged. But consider the alternative. In 8 hours, the first wave of devourers will tear through real space like paper. By the time conventional Imperial reinforcements arrive, there won't be anything left to reinforce. This ritual, this temporary transcendence, it's not just our best option, it's our only option. Governor Hartek, who had remained conspicuously quiet, finally found his voice. What guarantee do we have that the Emperor will answer? That he even can answer? The Astronomicon has been irregular for decades. Some sectors report complete communication blackouts. Mien's expression grew solemn. There are no guarantees, Governor. Faith, by its very nature, requires us to act without certainty. But I have touched the edge of that vast consciousness before. During my initiation into the deeper mysteries, the Emperor's presence is diminished, perhaps changed, certainly, but not absent. She moved to a control console, her fingers dancing over symbols that glowed in response to her touch. The chamber's lighting shifted, revealing the full scope of the ritual space. Concentric circles of carved runes covered the floor, their meaning lost to all but the most learned scholars of the Mechanicus. At the center, 12 pods arranged in a perfect dodecagon, each connected to the others by channels that pulsed with contained energy. The process requires 12 participants, Mayan continued, each representing a different aspect of Imperial authority: military command, civilian leadership, mechanical knowledge, spiritual guidance. Together, you form a microcosm of the Imperium itself. And what happens to us during this integration? Dr. Corvin asked, her scientific curiosity warring with visible apprehension. Your individual consciousness expands, for a brief time, minutes in real space, but potentially hours or days from your subjective perspective. You become part of something infinitely larger. You experience existence as the Emperor experiences it. Every prayer whispered in every shrine, every battle fought in his name, every death suffered for the Imperium. It is overwhelming. Vex was studying the runes on the floor, her enhanced optics recording and analyzing every symbol. These patterns, they're not just decorative, are they? They're some form of psychic circuitry. Precisely. The STC patterns that created this facility were designed to channel and focus psychic energy with unprecedented precision. The runes create a localized field effect that stabilizes the consciousness during transition. Without them, attempting direct contact with the Emperor would result in immediate psychological dissolution. Madness, Thorn muttered. Transformation, Mien corrected. But yes, to minds unprepared for the experience, it would appear as madness. This is why the selection of participants is crucial. Each must possess not only the authority to act on behalf of their respective spheres of influence, but the mental fortification to withstand temporary infinity. Governor Hartek was pacing now, his previous composure cracking. This is insanity. We're talking about abandoning everything we understand about proper Imperial protocol, about the sacred distance between mortal and divine. What you're suggesting isn't just heretical, it's impossible. Is it? Mien challenged. Consider what the Emperor was before his interment upon the Golden Throne. A man who willingly underwent transformation to become something greater than human. He understood that desperate times require desperate measures, that survival itself can demand we transcend our limitations. She gestured to the tactical displays, still showing the growing darkness beyond their system. The Devourers aren't just another Xenos threat. They exist partially outside normal space-time. Conventional weapons, conventional tactics, even conventional faith, none of these can touch them. But the Emperor's consciousness operates on the same multidimensional level. Through temporary integration with his awareness, we can perceive the Devourers as they truly are. And more importantly, we can act against them in ways that purely physical intervention cannot. Assuming we survive the process, Vex said quietly, what are the casualty projections? Mien hesitated for the first time since beginning her explanation. Historical records from similar rituals suggest a 30% fatality rate among participants. Another 40% experience varying degrees of permanent psychological alteration. Only 30% emerge, essentially unchanged. The chamber fell silent, except for the subtle humming of the machinery around them. The weight of that statistic settled over the group like a burial shroud. "So we're asking not just for volunteers, but for martyrs," Captain Thorne said finally. "We're asking for heroes," Mayen replied. "The kind of individuals who understand that some battles can only be won by those willing to sacrifice everything, including their very selves, for the greater good of humanity." Dr. Corvin was examining the neural interfaces in one of the pods, her scientific training evident in the precise way she studied each component. These connection points, they're designed to interface directly with the brain's neural pathways. The level of integration you're describing would require complete suppression of normal consciousness barriers. Correct? During the ritual, the boundaries that separate your individual mind from the collective unconscious of humanity are temporarily dissolved. You become a conduit through which the Emperor's will can manifest in real space. And what, exactly, are we hoping that will accomplish? Governor Hartek demanded. Assuming we don't all die in the process, assuming we actually make contact with the Emperor's consciousness, what then? Mien turned to face the group, her expression grave but determined. Then we become the instrument through which he acts. The Devourers exist partially in the warp, partially in real space. They're vulnerable to psychic attack, but only from sources operating on their own multidimensional level. Through the ritual, 12 mortal humans become temporary extensions of the Emperor's will. We gain the ability to strike at the Devourer's true essence, not just their physical manifestations. A psychic weapon, Vex mused, powered by the collective faith and authority of Imperial representatives. More than that, a moment of genuine divine intervention, channeled through mortal vessels willing to risk everything for the chance to save their people. The chamber's lighting pulsed, and warning signals began flashing on several displays. Mien quickly moved to check the readings, her expression growing tense. "The Devourers are accelerating their manifestation schedule," she announced. "We now have less than 6 hours before full emergence. If we're going to attempt this, we need to begin preparations immediately." Captain Thorne stepped forward, his hand resting on the pommel of his ceremonial sword. "Sister, I've served the Emperor for 40 years. I've seen men die for him on 100 battlefields. If this ritual offers even a chance of stopping these creatures, then I volunteer." Dr. Corvin looked up from her examination of the pod's neural interfaces. "The scientific implications alone make this impossible to ignore. If there's even a possibility that consciousness can be temporarily expanded beyond normal biological limitations, I volunteer as well." Governor Hartek was shaking his head, but his expression was resigned rather than defiant. "Emperor, preserve us all. If we're truly facing extinction, then conventional protocols become meaningless." "I volunteer." One by one, other members of the group stepped forward. Military officers, tech adepts, administrative officials, each carrying the authority to act for their respective spheres of Imperial governance. Mien watched with something that might have been pride as 12 individuals made the decision to risk everything for the chance to save their world. "Very well," she said finally. "The ritual requires 4 hours of preparation. Mental conditioning exercises, neural interface calibration, psychic shielding protocols. I must warn you all one final time, what we are about to attempt has never been done on this scale. We are venturing into uncharted territory, guided only by faith and necessity." As the group began moving toward the preparation chambers, Inquisitor Vex caught Mayen's arm. "Sister, a final question. When you say we'll experience existence as the Emperor experiences it, what exactly does that mean?" Mien's expression grew distant, haunted by memories of her own partial contact with that vast consciousness. "It means you'll understand, for the first time, what it truly costs to be the guardian of humanity. Every life lost in the Emperor's name weighs upon his consciousness. Every world that falls to darkness diminishes him. Every prayer whispered in faith adds to his strength. but also to his burden. She paused, looking out at the tactical displays, showing the growing threat beyond their system. You'll understand that faith isn't about receiving answers to prayers. It's about becoming the answer to someone else's prayer. In 4 hours, we 12 will either become the instrument of salvation for this world, or we will become martyrs whose deaths buy time for others to find another way. And if we fail? Vex asked quietly. Then we fail knowing we gave everything we had to give, that we held nothing back when our people needed us most, that our faith was measured not in words whispered in darkness, but in our willingness to step into that darkness ourselves. The preparation chambers hummed with activity as the selected participants underwent the complex process of mental and physical conditioning required for the ritual. Neural interfaces were calibrated, psychic dampeners adjusted, and emergency medical equipment prepared for every contingency the Mechanicus could imagine. Mien moved among them like a shepherd tending her flock, offering guidance, reassurance, and final instructions. When the time came to enter the pods, each participant faced the moment with the grim determination of those who understood they might not survive the next hour. As the ritual began, as 12 mortal minds prepared to touch infinity, the chamber filled with a light that existed beyond the normal spectrum. In that light, faith became action, prayer became power, and the desperate hope of one world reached out across the void to touch the consciousness of the master of mankind. Whether that consciousness would answer remained to be seen, but for the first time in months, the people of Tertius Majoris had something more powerful than fear driving their actions. They had faith made manifest, and 12 souls willing to risk everything to give that faith meaning. The ritual commenced, and in the growing darkness beyond their world, something vast and ancient began to take notice.